I'd like to introduce our instructor for today, Kathy Perret. Some of you may have had the pleasure of getting her irrigation assistance either at your home or business in the past with our free irrigation evaluation program. Although we're not doing in-person home visits at this point, we are available for phone visits or virtual visits. Kathy's had a lot of fun with people on FaceTime looking at controllers. So Kathy's a water resources specialist with the City of Santa Barbara. She's a certified irrigation auditor and an avid home gardener and beekeeper. And now I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Hello, hello, and welcome. I see all your faces out there. Actually, I don't see anybody's, but I'm going to pretend I'm talking to each one of you individually. I'm getting pretty good at it on telephone and on FaceTime and video chats. So today we have a lot to try and cover in a fairly limited amount. So I'm going to cover some of the real highlights, and then we'll talk on we're going to talk about the actual basics of controllers, some terminology that is best if you can understand it. And the terminology doesn't matter which controller you're looking at, they're all talking the same language. So that's going to help us because all of you most likely have different brands of timers. Talk about a few of the common issues and then how we can remediate those, a few of the advanced features which are super to understand and to know they're even existing on your controller. And then some of the latest efficiency technology that you can take advantage of. You can retrofit your existing controller or look into using web resources or even purchasing a new controller. And then we'll cover some questions and answers. All right, Madeline, next slide. So basically all controllers have three features. When do you want to turn your sprinkler on? That's your start time. How long do you want to run each zone? That would be the run time. What days or what interval that you want to apply to the watering, whether you want to water 2 days a week or whether you want to water every 10 days. And honestly, it really doesn't matter. You can have the $39.99 variety clock all the way up to $400 or $1,000. They all do the same thing. Next slide. Many of us living in Santa Barbara might actually recognize a few of these old controllers. I had to put just some pictures up here just for fun. The one on the front, the PEG system, that in 1962, that was one that my dad had. He absolutely loved it. You pulled the pegs out, which day you wanted to water. You could pick 14 days within 2 weeks. You could set a start time on the hour, and you could only make adjustments to how long you wanted to run your sprinklers by 5 minutes at a time, but it was automated. So then we moved into the 70s and we started getting some better technology. We got lights and bells and whistles and push buttons, but it was great. But as the end of the 70s came in, as you can see the advertisement, they introduced what's called programs. Programs allow you to set different watering days for different garden areas. And you can even see it says it solves slope, runoff, and puddling. So next slide. And then we've moved into some of the fancier push button controllers. You can see on the left, it has different programs. It has days and times. Exactly the same thing as what we're now looking at with another example of a controller on the right side. When you're looking at the controller on the right side here, on almost every single controller, if you're going clockwise from the run position, was it at 12 o'clock? They're almost all in exactly the same order. You always set the current date and time. You'll click one more down. It'll be what time do you want your irrigation to come on? What are your start times? Click it again. On these two, you may have the station run times. So then you set, okay, I want station 1 to run 10 minutes, station 2 to run 20 minutes, and then the days to water. So on the right-hand side are your basic programs. On the left-hand side ends up giving you a few advanced features as well as the manual. So let's move to the next slide. Excuse me. We also nowadays, we've moved up into this 21st century, and we have smart controllers. They're weather-based. They have a module, or they have a weather station or a soil moisture station on site so that they can automatically adjust the program with changes in the weather. They respond to rain. They'll either interrupt the raining cycle for a few days if it's just a small sprinkle, or they can actually delay upcoming watering cycles depending on how much rain we've received and what the future forecast holds. And they have a smartphone app, which is pretty cool because now you can actually turn your sprinkler on by hand, look at it in the field for a minute or 2 minutes, make sure there's nothing that needs repair, maintenance adjustments, turn it back off, turn the next one on, or you can sit on your couch and make adjustments to your scheduling right there. All right, next slide. Irrigation controllers versus hand watering, they're packed with features. They're convenient. They don't depend on your memory to remember to turn them off. Even timers don't always work. I set a timer on my clock and then I'm like, why is that thing beeping at me? Oh yeah, I put the drip system on. They do what you tell them to do, unlike the kids. Although you may tell them to do something multiple times and they say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and they will do it, even if you don't want to water it 2 or 3 times with 2 or 3 start times. And they can adjust for seasons, even if you don't have a smart controller. Most controllers in the last 20 years have what's called a seasonal adjust. The deal with the smart controllers are, or any controller, they only do what you tell them, but so the brain of the controller is actually you. So that's why we're here today. We're going to try and figure out how you can be the one in control of your controller. You want to tell it what to do, and we're going to walk around and figure out how to do that just right. Okay, next one. So the basic terminology, a station, a valve, and a zone. You'll hear those interchangeably. A station is a setting on the controller. Almost every single controller will have station runtime. The valve itself, the valve is the actual water fixture that supplies water, and it connects by wiring to the irrigation controller. So the station on the controller will say, turn on valve number 1. And then you talk about the zone, and the zone is the area that's receiving the water in the landscape. So if you have a front lawn area, we'll say that's number 1 down on the lower left. That's zone number 1. I want water, and I'm going to use valve that's connected to station number 1 in order to get the water there. It sounds confusing, but basically they're all talking about the same thing. The biggest one to remember is that zone and station are interchangeable on a lot of the clocks. Next slide. So station itself, and I mentioned this already, you'll see it. It'll say station runtime. And that does, it refers to the specific valve that's going to turn that on. In your controller, there are those little wires that are on the inside and they connect to a specific valve. That's how the controller sends the electrical impulse to the solenoid on your valve to say open or close. Next slide. Picture of anti-siphon valves. Most of us have these in our garden. You can go to the next slide. We'll show you the 2 different types of valves. There are anti-siphon valves, which are the ones that are above ground. Notice the wiring there coming off the solenoid. That's what attaches to your controller. Or you have subsurface inline valves. They do the same thing. They listen to what the controller or the timer says when to open and when to close. And that's where the water runs through. It's a good place to look if you're having problems with controllers not working. Make sure that the wire nuts that are holding the wires are actually dry and they're in a silicone nut, because those inline ones, it's like being in a bathtub. So water and electricity, they don't play well together. Next slide. Well, if you're talking about a zone, that's the region that's actually specifically getting water when you're having the irrigation controller turn on a specific station. So example, say you have a flower bed might be considered one zone. The lawn might be considered zone 2 or a different zone. Strong advice, you don't have to draw as pretty a picture as this one, but I really recommend you draw a little picture of your house and areas where each of your zones are. Put the number so that when you're scheduling your irrigation controller, you can look and say, oh, zone number 1, I want to schedule station number 1, and I can give it the runtime. So basically, station number 1 is controlling a specific valve that's watering a specific zone. Talking in circles, but I'm hoping that's making sense to you. Okay, next slide. Aha. So we have a question. How many stations or zones are on your controller? And you may not even know, but if you're doing it yourself, hopefully you have an idea. We'll give it a couple minutes here and go from here. How we doing, Madeline?
We'll give folks another 20 seconds or so.
Results are in. Half the people have between 5 and 12 stations on their controllers, which is, I see that really often. Most people will have, like if you buy a controller, they usually sell them in groups of 4 zones, 8 zones, 12, or some of them are 6 or 12. And most single family residences nowadays, we usually have 6 or 7. So this is good. So keep in your mind how many zones you have, because each person is going to kind of in their own mind figure out what schedule is, and we're going to play a little bit here on trying to determine what sort of factors we need to know before we can program our controllers. Let's step to the next slide here real quick, Madeline. Thank you. So certain things you absolutely need to know if you're going to schedule your controller. And this is why I say you should draw a little map. You can put stick people and things like that in it. You need to know where the zones are and what kind of plants and sprinklers you have on each of the zones. So if you have a front yard with water-wise plants on drip irrigation, you'll write that down. And then if you have trees on inline drip, and if you have a lawn on pop-up sprinklers, it's really important to know what kind of sprinklers you have, because that'll determine how long you need to water the zone. And you also want to know a little bit about what kind of soil you have, whether it's clay or if it's sand. That will help you figure out how many days a week you want to water. I'm hoping that most of you guys already have an irrigation controller and you already are somewhat scheduled, but you're trying to fine tune the one that you currently have. So if you want to know how many days a week you want to water the zone, and if you're already watering a zone a certain amount of days, write that down. Then you want to know what time you want to start the irrigation. It's always recommended that you water either just after sunset or before sunrise. You want to eliminate wind as a factor to blowing off any of the water that might be misting from your sprayers. And you want to eliminate it being in the middle of the day where the sun is shining and you're losing irrigation water to evaporation. So Madeline's going to share, I'll show you the irrigation schedule template. She'll share that. You can download it. It'll be on our chat feature here, the irrigation schedule. And this is super simple, but in conjunction with drawing a little map of your house, and yes, this is my house from a bird's eye view, and not very pretty, but it works. It shows me where the valves are. It shows me the zones with a number on it. And then if I were to put that into my irrigation schedule, I would look at the red zone, which is number 1, and I would put down water-wise plants front yard. And number 2 would be grass, left side backyard. Station number 3 would be fruit trees, drip zone backyard. And then in order to fill this schedule out the first time, I would probably review my schedule and write down what I currently have. But if it was new, I would think about how many days a week do I want to water my drip line? How many days a week do I feel like I need to water my grass? And when you're initially scheduling, you want to figure it out for your 100%, for your hot summertime water. And then you'll be able to adjust, if you can get it, the amount of water perfect to keep your plants healthy in July and August. Then you can adjust it down in the fall, off in the winter, and then slowly start increasing your water back up to that 100% as the spring is coming, like we're getting into spring now. All right, next slide. So the first thing to do, and I've made a couple of innuendos at this, but you always want to write down your existing schedule before you start making changes. You can always set it back to what it was, but if you forget how many minutes you had, then you have to start by making things up. So it's better to write it all down first. When you're going to look at the display on your irrigation controller, the display will always have a little letter in either the left or the right-hand corner. It'll be A, B, C, or D, depending on how many programs you have. You want to write down the different start times, run times, and days of the week for each program. So you make sure that you're on program A, turn that center dial, check the current date and time, obviously, make sure it's the right date and the right year, go to start times, and you will have multiple start times. So you want to look at and write it down, multiple start times, and then go to run times. And using your irrigation schedule, it'll say station 1, write down the amount of minutes that's scheduled to run. Go and look at every single station. Even if you think you only have 4 stations, but the clock can go to 6, go through every single one and make sure that even those that don't have a valve connected, that they say off or 0 minutes. And then you're going to go to the upper right-hand side of most all the controllers. There's a little button that says either PRG for program, or it's a slider that goes A, B, or C. Push it again and get the next program and write down the schedule for that program. There could be nothing on program B, no start times, no valves, but then you go to program C and lo and behold, somebody scheduled 1 station. So you want to make sure you look at all of them so you know that you don't have any duplicates. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, the programs themselves help you to organize the individual stations that have similar water needs. So a program is kind of like a little mini controller within the controller. The controller overall tells you when you want to turn things on, how long you want to water it for, and how many days a week. But you may have a landscape that has a variety of different plants and different zones within it that need different days of the week watering. So you would want to put everything that wants the same days of the week. So we're going to use an example. Say you have 2 zones of lawn. You're going to want to water them. If you're watering them 3 days a week, I recommend 2. But if you happen to be watering them 3 days a week, you would want to put them on their own program. So you would schedule program A, and you'd put just the stations that are the 3-day-a-week areas that you want to water. So you'd put, if it's station 1 and station 2, you tell it what time you want it to come on and how long you want each of those run times for those 2 stations in the lawns. You also have another garden area that's water-wise plants, but not on this example. I'm sorry, on this example, you have hedges, and you only want to water them twice a week. So those would need to be on a separate program, and on a different program, you can actually set them to water only 2 days a week with their very own start time, different from the lawns, and the different days to water. So what you're doing here is, it used to be that we put everything on program A. In the long run, what ends up happening is that if we put program A and we're watering it 3 days a week, then the lawn is getting watered appropriately, but the hedges are getting overwatered. And then if I still have an avocado tree, which I only want to water once every 3 weeks, and it's getting watered every single week, I'm way overwatering that. So we're killing plants with kindness, or you're not giving them enough water. So each one has its own program. Let's go to the next slide. Programs can be really complicated for people. So the problem with the program is that you can put one station on program A. You can put the same station on program B, and you can do it again on program 3 or on program C, which means then that you end up watering that area 3 separate times with 3 different start times. So it's good to write it down. Then you'll look and you'll say, wait a minute, why is this on 2 or 3 different places? It may be that you want it there, but that's a decision that you make as the brain. Let's go to the next slide. Strongly advise that you keep a copy of your irrigation schedule, that little piece of paper, and a diagram of where everything is, and the manual to your irrigation controller in a plastic bag. Put it in the box so that you can close it in. Through experience, I've learned snails like to eat paper. And when you need to know where it is and you can't read through the holes, or you can't read the water that smeared the ink, and you need to find the manual because you don't know how to turn the silly thing on and water just one zone, it's nice to know right where it is. And you can put it in a file and you'll know where it is for the first 2 or 3 years, and 5 years from now, when you're redoing your sprinkler system and you can't remember where the valves are, you're going to be wishing you had a copy of that valve, of that map right there in the controller. So let's go to the next slide. Aha. This is always an important question. Who controls your controller? And even if you're not the person that does the actual regular seasonal adjustments, this class is still really important for you. It's good to know what to look for, to look and know whether or not your controller is on default, or, oh my gosh, it's pouring down rain and my sprinklers are on. How do I turn it off? I have to say, I've done water checkups at people's homes, and I'll ask them, let's take a look at your irrigation controller. Your water use is up $300 and most likely due to an irrigation schedule issue, and the homeowner doesn't even know where it is. So if that's not something you're familiar with, walk around your property. It needs to be plugged in. So you're going to find that box either in the garage or on the side of the house somewhere. It's almost 50-50, maybe not quite so much. Most of the people out here on our webinar today are actually controlling it themselves. And for those of you that have a gardener who's doing it, I'd strongly recommend that you have him show you where the controller is and make sure that you have a key, because sometimes they're locked and you can't get access to them. All right, well, this is good to know. I hope this is going to be helpful for you guys when you get home. Let's go to the next slide. Irrigation controllers. They always seem to have a mind of their own. and they're going off at the wrong time of the day. It's morning and your sprinklers are going off at 9 p.m. and you can't figure out what the heck's going on. Or it's like, I could have sworn I just saw that back lawn zone come on and it's coming on again. What's happening? So if it's running at the wrong side of the time of the day, it's usually a scheduling issue. It's usually the power went out. It's a good sign the power went out, and your irrigation clock, when you look at current date and time, it's either that the little AM PM is so tiny, you didn't see that. You didn't see that you had set it for PM when it was actually AM. So check and make sure that the day and time is correct. I usually recommend, even though it's only an hour, when we spring forward and we fall back, change your controller. Because otherwise, when you're expecting the irrigation to come on at 6 a.m. and it's coming on at 7 a.m., it could be watering the sidewalk. It could be watering the neighbor who walks their dogs at that time. It's important to know when you expect it to run. If the zone is coming on multiple times, the usual culprit on that is that you have more than one start times for that station, or you have that station on multiple programs. The biggest thing I see though is that if you're looking at your controller, and I'm going to have you imagine this, you're looking at your controller, you've taken that center dial, you click it down to start times, you're on program A, you see the little A up in the display, and it says 1, and then it gives you a time, 6 a.m. So that's your first start time. Most controllers will have 3 to 4 start times. What you're going to want to do is go to the advance button. Most controllers, it's a little arrow or it's a plus button. You push either one of those. Oh, look, there, you can see the words. Sorry about that. You can push either one of those and you'll go forward or you go backward, but it always goes in a big circle. So you push the forward button and you're going to get a number 2, which will say start time number 2. If you only want your sprinkler station, that zone, to come on one time, you should only have one start time. It might say off, which is great. Use the advanced button, go to start time number 3 and start time number 4 and make sure there are no times scheduled. What I see very, very often is that there'll be a start time. We're going to stick with 6 a.m. That's start time 1. You go to start time 2, it says 6 a.m. Even if the clock says exactly the same time, irrigation controllers, they only want to do what you have asked them to. If you have 2 start times, it knows you want to water that program and all the zones in that program twice. So it's going to start at 6 a.m. It's going to water all the different stations within that program, and then it's going to come back sequentially and water all those programs again. So you'll duplicate water. If you wanted it to come on twice, like your cycle and soaking, because your landscape has a little bit of a slope, or it's really, really clay soil and it just doesn't absorb water, then you might have only 5 minutes scheduled for the runtime, but you might have it coming on at 6 a.m. It waters every zone that's in there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 7, whatever you have scheduled for each of the runtimes. And then you have it scheduled to come on again in a half an hour or an hour so that that first 5 minutes could soak in, and then it repeats itself. That's called cycle and soak. And that may be there. The biggest thing I see though is that, and it's usually gardeners, can be homeowners, but you'll have exactly the same time scheduled on each one, because some of the older controllers, there's a trick to getting to the off portion of the time. You have to go backwards. So you've taken your center dial, you've turned it down to start time. Once you have the start time number 1, which you want to keep. So you push the advance button, go to start time number 2. You want to put that to off. You have to go backwards to midnight. So using the minus button, there's a plus and a minus button for the time. If you push the minus button, it'll go 11:45, 11:30, all the way around. You can just hold it down, it'll speed around. go all the way back to 11:30, push the button, 11:45, midnight, one more time, it'll say off. If you go clockwise, you're never going to get to the off button. It's going to go 11:45, 12 o'clock, 12:15, 12:30. You have to go backwards to midnight to get to the off. And that's where the manual comes in, but I don't think anyone ever reads that in the manual. This is a big one to remember, so play with it a little when you go home. Let's go to the next slide and see if there's what the next thing is for us to talk about here. A lot of times people will say, well, my irrigation's not coming on. My clock must be broken. The irrigation controller works with electricity, and yes, they do get faulty. They are a little computer chip brain in there. The new ones, they seem to work really, really well. But the biggest issue when a valve is not coming on or it's not shutting off is due to the little electrical wires that are in where the valve connects to the wires coming from your irrigation controller. A lot of times I will see folks that have taped them together with electrical tape. That's a great temporary fix, but those two wires, even though it's low voltage, they are what's transferring the electrical current from the clock. So when the clock is turned on, it sends an electrical current to the valve that says open. If there's water or the wires are not connected really well, like you don't have a good waterproof wire nut on them, you won't get a good connection and the valve will not come on. Trust you, it won't come on regularly. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. Easy to fix. Go to the hardware store, buy some little wire nuts. They make them for outdoor use. They have some silicone in them. Take the tape off, stick the two wires in and twist it shut. Fixed. If your controller is not remembering its program. Most of the new controllers have lithium-ion batteries, so they remember the program when the power goes out. Older controllers, a lot of the older controllers, if you open the box where the terminal wiring is, you'll see a 9-volt battery in there. That's what retains your days and settings. If your 9-volt battery does not have enough power to remember to do that, and being outside, it's about 1.5 years. So I recommend changing that battery every year. What happens is that the controller will go on a default mode. It's set by the companies, the irrigation companies, to water what they consider for most of the United States to be just the bare minimum, 10 minutes. But it's 10 minutes every station, every day, every start time at midnight. So what usually ends up happening is that you're not seeing it go off. You don't realize that you are watering it 7 days a week instead of 3 days a week. And you get your water bill at the end of the month and it's double. So my first thing to do, go out and look at that controller. Click through, look at the start, look at the days of the week to water. If it's on every day, you know you're on default. If you schedule your controller at 10 minutes, you won't be able to tell whether it's a default mode or not. That's why I never schedule stations 10 minutes. I either put 9 minutes or I put 11 minutes. So all I have to do, if the power's been out and I think my controller might be in default, I go take that center dial, I turn it to the run times, and if station number 1 is 10 minutes, station number 2 is 10 minutes, 3 is 10 minutes, I know that I'm gonna have to reset my whole controller, that it's on default. Important to make sure you take a look at that. Okay, next slide. These are one of the simple things that you can install. If you want to give yourself a Christmas present that only costs you $20 and will save you at least $20 a year if you're an all-year waterer, install a rain shutoff sensor. They wire into your controller as just 2 wires. There's no polarity. You can't shock yourself. What this does is, you see the white part over my index finger there. That's a little catch can in there. And it's a little on-off switch. And once you get 1/4 of an inch of water in the top of that, there's cork that swells. or felt that swells and it shuts the switch off. Within about 3 or 4 days, that felt that's inside dries out, the on-off switch is able to open again, and so now your sprinklers can come back on. It doesn't keep your irrigation off. Say we have an inch of rain, it's not going to keep it off for the full 2 or 3 weeks in the wintertime that you wouldn't need to water. But it does give you the convenience of not running outside in your slippers and your jammies at 6 in the morning because it's pouring down rain and your sprinklers are on and all the neighbors are looking at you. So the one trick I will tell you on these, because obviously most people hook them up on the roof, you want to, don't put them under the eaves. They actually do need to be in the rain. And don't put them under a tree because you won't get rain that actually is the right amount to interrupt your watering cycle. But once again, if you're looking at that conical outermost part, in the very top, there's a little push button in the middle. Yeah, right there, Madeline. And if you put a sprinkler, say you wire it in your controller, you're holding it in your hand, turn one of your sprinkler valves on, push and hold that little click button there. Push it down, it'll click, hold it. In about 15 seconds, the sprinkler will shut off. Release it, and the sprinkler will come back on. Now you know you've wired it correctly, and you can be assured that it's actually going to work, and then you can mount it up on your roof. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the number one question. Once you've figured out, what's the start time, what's the run time, and you've drawn yourself out a map, you're going to be going, how much should I be watering this? I always remind people to try and set their controllers to start with how much your plants will need when you are providing all of the water they need, your July and August water use. So the easiest thing to do is to go to the watering calculator. What it will do is you can put in on it, you're going to put your zip code so it knows whether you live up in the mountains, whether you live on the seashore. You're going to choose what type of plant you're watering. On this example, on the far right on the top shelf, I've chosen low water use plants, water-wise plants, Mediterranean, a lot of what we see here. You have other selections as well. Then you're going to pick your soil type because that's going to determine how often you need to water. Sand, the water just goes straight through it. If you drop your water bottle on the beach, it's gone. If you were to water in your yard and you applied 100 gallons, 100 gallons would be below the root zone in your plants that wouldn't have a chance to use it. But if you had clay soil, it would sit on the surface forever. But once it absorbed in it, you'd have this great soil sponge that holds on to the water. So on this example, we're choosing loam because that's what we all want. A lot of places in Santa Barbara have clay loam, so you'll have to figure that out. If you dig a hole in your backyard and you fill it with a gallon or two of water, if you can go to lunch and come back and you still have water in the hole, I would select clay loam as your water choice, your soil choice. And then on the bottom shelf, the last one there, you choose what kind of sprinkler you have. We've selected the drip because that puts water out in gallons per hour versus if we were all the way on the other side and we selected sprinkler. Sprinklers put water out in gallons per minute. So that's going to determine how long we want to water it. Let's go to the next slide and we'll see what the recommendation was. So this is the schedule comment that you'll get. It'll give you how many minutes per week for the different months of the year. If you're initially scheduling your irrigation controller, use the July, August minutes per week to schedule your controller, and then you'll use the seasonal adjust to adjust it either up or down depending on what the weather's doing. But the one thing you want to do is make sure you're giving the plants the water that they need to be healthy when you're providing 100% of it. So this is telling me in my drip zone, I need to water just under an hour a week. What I've done, and I've used this one personally, I personally know with my system, it's a little more efficient than this is. This gives me a good starting point. I set my controller at this. I like to water my water-wise plants twice a week. And so I was first watering them 30 minutes and 30 minutes. I waited a couple of weeks and I found that the soil was still really wet, a couple inches under when the next watering cycle was supposed to be. So I turned it down. I customized the schedule. So I've ended up finding that for me, I need 22 minutes twice a week. So in the long run, I only need 44 minutes in July. And it could be where my house is located. And I water the same in July as I do August. So you'll need to use this as a good jumping off point to tell you how many minutes. And then in the first month, watch your soil, watch your plants. You check the soil, don't just check the top, go down a couple inches. If it's still moist and you're supposed to water the next morning, you can probably reduce it by a couple of minutes. A couple of minutes will save you anywhere from 15 to 20 gallons or 25 gallons per minute on a whole irrigation system. So it's a good way to budget your water and get just what you need. Let's move to the next slide, please. This feature, which you'll see on the waterwisesb.org site and on the city's water conservation site at santabarbaraca.gov/waterwise, is the percentage of how much the plants need now in the season. You can look at this. We update it every week on Wednesdays. So as of May 3rd, yesterday, we only needed to water 63% of what our irrigation controller's 100% was scheduled for. So looking at this schedule, this guideline schedule, if we're scheduled for the 55 minutes in July, I'm going to look at March and I only need 33 minutes, which is a little less. It's less than the 63 because this is based on historical. This is called the ETO, which is the evapotranspiration. It's how much is evaporating because of warm weather and wind and warm soil, and how much is transpiring, which is how much the plants are using in their growth pattern. Most of us know that this is a really warm February. We've had 70 degrees, we've had heat that's much higher than it has been in the last 10 years. So that's why it's always good to look at the percent adjust. Personally, I usually just turn my controllers off in January and February. Maybe I give one watering in February because we always get that. Maybe it's going to be spring. We always get a week and a half where it's 69, 72. It's great out there, and I get the springtime itch to set my garden going. But I keep it off because what that's doing is allowing the roots that are in the soil that have already been rained on back in December and January. If you stress them a little bit, they're going to reach out and grow longer roots and a bigger root base to try and get to the water. The root base, the more efficient they are at utilizing any moisture that's in the soil, and the more drought tolerant they are. So just to kind of think about that in the back of your mind as you're making adjustments, your irrigation controller according to the weather. All right, let's go next slide. And this is a great picture. It shows people who don't change their irrigation. The red is typical, what we used to see. You turn it off in January, you turn it on in March or April, it waters exactly the same thing all summer long until November, and then you turn it back off. And if you look at the blue zone, if you make adjustments, all of that red is water that's basically wasted. The plants need it. You're overwatering the soil and it's just going below the plant root zone, and you're just paying water that's not getting used. So changing it, even if it's monthly, using the percent adjust, great way to go. Let's go to the next slide. We should be wrapping this up a little bit, but I really, really like this text that you can get on a weekly basis. If you'd like, you can sign up for this. You want to text, if you'd like it in Spanish, text to, if you'd like it in English, text to WaterWise to the numbers that are on here. It's the 855-510-0241. And on a weekly basis, we will send you the updated watering index. Can we go to the next slide, please? We'll make that available on the chat there. Irrigation controllers, weather-based, there are so many different models out there. They actually adjust, like it's been warm, they would have watered more. If it rains, they turn it off. And they'll turn it off depending on the zone. So if you have a tree and it rains 2 inches, that zone may stay turned off for 6 weeks, while your flower bed may only stay turned off for a week and a half. They're really handy, but they still need to be programmed initially, and they need to be customized correctly. Otherwise, all your irrigation is going to be based upon faulty information. You know, if they say garbage in, garbage out, you don't want to do that. So next slide, please. So just a quick review, because I know I want to give some time for questions here. Controllers are super helpful, but hand watering works as well. So if you wanted to turn it off all winter and just supplementally water by hand, that's great. I have to say, I have never seen somebody standing in the rain with a hose, but I have seen irrigation running full blast in the middle of a storm. The biggest thing, which I've said multiple times today, the initial programming will need to be fine-tuned. And once you get it, write it down. Put that written schedule in your controller. Use the features, the watering adjust feature, to make adjustments as the seasons change. They do really need you to take some time to look at them. They're not set and forget them. You got to check on them. You need to make sure that the power outages haven't affected them at all. And honestly, more plants are killed with kindness, more killed with overwatering than underwatering. So don't let the controller take your power. You're the brains. You need to be the one that controls your controller. If you feel like you made a mistake, reset it to what initially was and move on. If the power's lost, you can go back out and reset it. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we're going to have a couple more lunch and learns. Finding and repairing leaks inside and outside, and how to isolate where the leak might be inside and outside. And then we have special guests talking about the water-wise native plants. You can get some specific information on those by going to the Santa Barbara homepage and look at garden classes. Next slide, please. And I do want to let everybody know we've just posted this. Once again, we're going to be having the Waterwise Garden Contest. So if you have a beautiful lawn or landscape, it's got to be a front yard, apply to be part of our Waterwise Garden Contest. We'll be part, Santa Barbara is just one part of the county, and we've had some beautiful examples you can see on the right. That was our winner last year. They're actually from the city of Santa Barbara, but it's amazing what's out there. Please share what you've done. And then I think we're going to wrap it up here. What are we at? Yep, there we go. And Madeline, if you wouldn't mind, if we have any questions that haven't been dealt with, I'd love to address them.
Sure. So I will stop sharing at some point to put some resources in the chat, but feel free to enter any Q&As in the Q&A feature. So Kathy, I know this is a very common question that we get. It's two parts, so I'll start with the first one, which is gophers. So as we know, those are often a cause of water waste. So one of our participants said their worst drip system problem is gophers, voles, moles, ground squirrels, etc. Those that are eating through the tubing. Do you have any tips for gophers?
Gosh, I wish they were tasty, but that's a really bad answer. I'm sorry. Gophers are really the nemesis to gardens and drip irrigation. The thing with the gophers and drip irrigation is that you want to have your drip on the surface and not buried. If it's buried, then the gophers find it as a water source and they'll chew on the water source. If it's on, and then we can't find it because it's underground. If it's on the surface, just maybe covered with mulch, you can turn it on once a month and you can look and see if you have geysers or you can hear the water flowing. Because gophers may be a problem, but so are raccoons and skunks. Through the drought, they learned that irrigation systems, especially drip microsprays, were a fabulous water fountain. And they taught their young ones. And so now we have very smart animals here. And if you've seen the commercial with the squirrels where the mom says, it's personal now, I don't have an answer. Short of make sure that you don't bury your tubing. You only cover it with mulch and turn it on every 2 or 3 weeks and just take a look at it and see if you can find any areas that have been munched on.
And then the other question is about deer that are tripping over the tubes and pulling those up. So what are your recommendations for even people trip on drip tubing? So what should we do if that sort of gets wonky?
Yeah, the drip tubings themselves, you really should use they're called soil staples. They're the U-shaped metal staples. They're about 6 inches long. You should tack them down all the way down. If you're having deer or you have small children and they're tripping, put them closer together. But every time you turn the system on, it pressurizes and the pipe kind of squirms. It'll get water pressure and it kind of gets like a snake and it'll bump itself out. So you might want to put them like every 3 feet, tack it down. And then if you're covering it with mulch, it's less likely to be tripped upon. Other than not seeing what you have, that's the only advice that I can make on that.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. And then this is one specific to a Weathermatic SL1600 controller. So imagine the Weathermatic in your head.
I have one sitting outside. Okay.
The program D seems to function differently than programs A through C. So currently they have A and B set. Program C shows every zone as off, but program D shows zones that have already been set in programs A or B as used, and then zones not set in any program as off. Is that a function of the wiring to the zones, or is program D for this Weathermatic meant to be used differently?
My understanding, and every controller has a few different advanced sort of features. My understanding on the Weathermatic, the smart line controller that you're talking about, is that the program D allows you to supplementally water and to set it for multiple, like say you want to water an avocado tree and you want to water it every 28 days. It would allow you to have it maybe watered at one point and then also 28 days. You can set 2 stations on the program. Most times they don't allow you. This one doesn't allow you to set multiples because it'll say used. So you can't reset it onto program D. It's an advanced feature that allows you to set it for more than like every 4 days or 2 times a week. It's a customized cyclical watering. I would definitely look in the manual. The controller that I have that I use as a teaching controller, one of the Weathermatics, is a very older model and it has some different features than the newer Weathermatics do.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Let's see. So for rain, what amount of rain and therefore duration of time off do you recommend for the rain delay setting?
The rain, oh, you mean on the controller, the rain delay. Okay. The rain delay is super convenient for multiple reasons. One, if we get an inch of rain, you cannot water your high water using plants. So most all these rules, we're going to call them, are based upon turf grass watering because it's the only thing that might need supplemental watering in the winter time around here. So if you get an inch of rain, you can you don't need to water for 14 days for your higher water using short rooted plants that have 6 to 8 inch roots, such as turf grass. You can use the rain delay to set it for 14 days and it'll delay every zone on there. It's also super convenient in the summertime if you're going to have, well, I guess we'll have parties in our backyards again, but say you're having a party in your backyard and the kids are going to camp out. It's really good to put a rain delay on so that the sprinklers don't water the children on Friday night at 2 in the morning when your irrigation is set to go off. So you can delay it and then it'll count itself back off and it'll start back automatically on its own. So you don't have to remember to turn it back on.
All right, thank you, Kathy. We've got a lot of good questions coming in. Okay, so going back to the minutes per week in that calculator, that spits out minutes per week and then it's in months. So for the example of 44 minutes per week, is it better to do 14 minutes 3 days a week, split it into 2 days a week, therefore do 22 minutes, or 44 minutes 1 day a week?
This particular one was drip zone. So the key on drip zone is you want to make sure you're watering it long enough that you've applied enough water to move itself down through the layers of soil. So definitely not 3 days a week. That is not long enough. The minimum of a drip system to run is 20 minutes or so. Otherwise, you're not really applying enough water. If your plants are mature and you feel that, you give it a 1 day a week watering, that could be perfect. That's a nice deep water. You fill in the root sponge and the plants are thriving. You may find though that 7 days between is too long. Maybe you only need to do it once every 5 days. Then you can use the cyclical feature on your controller to schedule it to water every 5 days. So it may come on Friday, and then next time on Wednesday, and then next time on Saturday. So you can't set the specific day that way, but you can give the right interval for the moisture in the soil. It depends on the plant, it depends on the soil type, so how much is in there, and it depends a lot on the irrigation system itself. Drips need to run longer than spray heads do to apply the same amount of water. I hope that helps.
And we do have some of that guidance in the results of the watering calculator, just some recommendations. But as Kathy said, a lot of this is set it and then watch your plants for the next month, because if they're very used to 3 days a week, you might need to wean them to 2 days a week. So it's one of those things that's very dependent on your home landscape or your landscape at your business. So building off of that, Kathy, we had another question about the watering percent adjust. And we saw the whole calendar, but can you reiterate that the percent adjust is really knocking down the highest month? So therefore, even though it spits out the whole calendar, what we're really wanting people to focus on is that July or August time.
Yeah, so you want to set your irrigation controller to be the 100% watering. And then when you get the calendar, if you know your summer 100% watering, you've got it set for 45 minutes, instead of going to every single zone in November when you want to bring it down to 50% of what you were watering in August, instead of going and pushing the button and then turning it down, go to zone 2 and push the button and turn it down. You can just go to the seasonal adjust button, set it at 50%, and then every station that you have, whether it's 4 stations or 12 stations, will automatically only water 50% of the time that you have scheduled. It's a really nice, convenient factor on there. And you can do it for different zones. I mean, you could set it for program A. You want everything in A to go at 50%, and then you want everything on B to be turned off because it's trees or something. So you can customize it with your landscape.
The idea is that it's a one button type of adjustment versus constantly changing the minutes and changing the minutes every season or every month.
Yeah, and that way you don't forget what you had perfectly set up for last August. If you keep changing them all year, then you forget. Now, was it 24 minutes or was it 42 minutes? I don't remember. But make it easy.
If someone wants to upgrade their controller to a smart controller, do they need to replace the valves and wiring as well?
Not at all. You're going to use the same wires that were hooked up to the valves that you already have. You're just going to take it off the wall, plug it in, hook it up to your Wi-Fi, and walk through the scheduling. Read the instructions. Sometimes some of them want you to measure how much water is going through. You can use it at your meter. You can measure it out to install it, but they have great customer service. Most all of them do.
And then we had a question about recommended brands or models of smart timers. So at the city, we can't recommend certain brands, but we do recommend in general that you talk to the local irrigation stores because they have a lot of experience with these. So whether you're comfortable going in person right now or just calling them on the phone, we have a lot of great local irrigation stores here. And that's where we usually tell people to get some more information on different timer options, smartphone apps. Almost all of them connect to a smartphone at this time. Just make sure you're not getting one that's intended for like a golf course when all you have is a home landscaping, because that might be too much controller.
You can go to WaterSense as well. Is it watersense.org?
The EPA WaterSense.
Yeah, the EPA WaterSense, and they have a list of weather-based and soil moisture controllers that have applied and have been approved as excellent. Most all of them have gone through WaterSense. I know we're getting close on time, but do we have a few more questions?
Questions, and as a reminding, the recording will be sent out to everyone. What would you define as winter months versus summer months?
Winter months around here start in November, December, January, February, and March, and then April. So if you were going to start watering, you'd start watering in April. The percentage just in general would be pretty close to 65 to 75%, depending on fog and wind and heat. Summer for us, our hot summer is July, August. September, it starts going down. October, you're going to be down to about 70% of what you were watering in July and August. And November, you're going to be down at about 30%. If you get to 30%, you don't need to water that week. It's not enough time on your irrigation controller to really affect the saturation of the soil.
We've got a question about a master valve. So it is zone 12 on their controller. Do they need to have a time assigned to zone 12 for any programs that are set to run?
If it's a master valve, yes, you have to have a time set to open that valve. You open the master valve, it allows water to flow into your irrigation system and to the valves that are going to come on, the ones that go to specific zones. So you need to have it come on. So if your sprinklers are coming on at 6 a.m., you need to have your master valve come on prior to 6 a.m., which allows water into the whole irrigation zone. Then the controller will go on and off and on and off. Everything will get watered. And then the master valve will shut off. So if you have 1 hour of watering, your master valve needs to be on for probably an hour and 15 minutes. If you have 2 hours of irrigation, your master valve needs to be open the whole time. If it's not, you won't have any water going. Master valves are great if you've had problems with valves getting stuck open and just running 24/7 for weeks. So yeah, it is important to have a time set, otherwise you won't have any water.
For clay soil, is it okay to turn off lawn irrigation in winter months?
I recommend it because most of us have what I fondly call hybrid Santa Barbara Bermuda grass. It maybe came in as turf green and marathon. Give it about 5 years. It is now a hybrid of other warm season grasses. They go dormant in the winter. You can water the dickens out of them. It's not going to make any difference. It's going to be green even when you turn it off. You may need to, say in the spring coming up like we are now, you might want to give them some wing feed, or you're going to put some nitrogen out on it. So yes, you're going to need to water that in. And it's just enough to get them growing for spring. We have some nice moisture at night and it's cool in the evenings. When the night times get above 60 degrees, then it's time to contemplate watering, because these are warm season and they go dormant when the evenings get cool.
If the controller is turned off due to rain and then it's turned on again, does the program resume as if it had never been turned off, or does it start again on the day it is turned back on?
It'll come back on as if it was never turned off on a regular controller. You have a day and a time scheduled, the current date and time, so it knows today is Thursday, and if you turn it to the on, the schedule says it's supposed to come on Friday, it will come on Friday.
Can a backup battery be changed without losing settings as long as the regular power supply isn't out?
Yes, as long as you've got power to it, you can change the backup battery. I recommend do it every year. We change our backup batteries, and the city, we send out a little notice in your water bill during when it's time to change the batteries in your smoke alarms. Like if you have one in your controller, change it at the same time. Even if it's not completely dead, it'll cost you $300 in double watering. It's cheaper to buy a new battery.
Do you have a recommendation for keeping ants out of clogging drippers?
No, unfortunately, I do not.
Does inline drip, is that a little easier, or do they still clog those?
The inline drip has that little copper valve flap on it to keep the roots out of it. So maybe the reaction with the moisture in the copper maybe creates a little galvanic sort of a tingle feeling, and it would keep the ants out. I've not had a problem with ants in my inline drip tubers. Around the fruit tree, it seems to work fine. I can't say for sure.
We've got some questions about fruit trees. So this one is, this person has an avocado tree on the same zone as 3 citrus trees, and they have sort of loamy clay. What do you recommend for timing?
I'm going to assume that these trees are mature. And so what the timing would be on those, it's going to depend. Do you have drip? Do you have micro spray? I'm going to go with, just because most people that have them in their yards have a drip system underneath them, whether it's inline or not. What I've read and been told from Cal Avo is that the avocado tree is the highest water using fruit tree that we have, and it needs about 300 to 500 gallons every 3 weeks or so. So depending upon what kind of sprinkler system you have, you can measure the amount of gallons by turning it on, read your meter before you turn it on, run it for half an hour, read your meter, calculate how many gallons are used in a half an hour, and then you can determine how much water you're actually applying to the tree. The other thing you can do is water it for like 50 minutes to an hour, let it soak in, go out the next day and dig down with a screwdriver or a trowel, or, oh, I don't have it here, one of those little houseplant moisture meters, go down about 6 or 8 inches. And is it moist down there? If it is, then that was long enough. But you have to really figure it out for your own irrigation system. Avocados need, especially now, I mean, they're starting to flower. Any of these trees that are starting to flower and fruit, this is when you water them the most. The avocado versus the citrus, the avocado will need more supplemental watering in September if we have Indian hot summers. So you may water them all at once, but in August you might use a hose or something set up with an inline tubing just to give the avocado an extra drink. I hope that helps. But you can get some really good resources on Cal Avo for that. And citrus trees, if they've been there mature for a while, just keep mulch underneath them. They have very shallow roots. So watering them every 2 or 3 weeks and just making sure that the moisture is going 6 or 8 inches deep is fine.
So for the typical winter with mature plants, can most folks in Santa Barbara totally turn off their irrigation system in January and February for things that aren't grasses, for non-lawn essentially?
It gets cool enough in the evenings. We have to remember that even though it doesn't feel like winter here, according to the plants, they're all going in their dormancy and non-growth period because of sunshine. When the time changes, you can turn your irrigation off around Thanksgiving and go Thanksgiving, December, January, probably supplementally water it once in February because it is springtime. The light is going. I mean, it's light till 6:15 at night now, 6:30. And then you usually, fingers crossed, we get our nice rainy March. So I don't go crazy in February because I assume that it's going to rain in March. If it doesn't, then you start watering a little earlier then. But yes, turn it off November, December, January, February. Supplement once in February, and then don't turn it on again until April. And in that in between time frame, look at your irrigation, make any repairs, maintenance issues, get rid of clogged things, make sure your controller's set properly, and then you're ready to go. Because man, when April hits, the plants are going for it.
And then we have a question about UC Verde buffalo grass, which is one that we're familiar with. So with UC Verde, which is a special kind of low water use grass, can that be skipped in the winter for watering?
Yes, and you should skip it in the winter. It is a low water using native grass. You have to pretend it's not in a residential landscape. You have to pretend it's in a field. And it grows best as Mother Nature designed it to grow, with no water in the wintertime. It goes deeper roots and has a very big root structure if you allow the plant to grow it. If you water it every other day or twice a week, plants are they're actually really lazy. If you supply them water in the top 6 inches, they'll never grow. So you've got to let it stress, and letting it stress in the wintertime when you're not going to kill the plant because it's cool, it's moist, it's not growing very much, will allow that plant to actually get roots that go 12 or 18 inches deep. And that's what makes it such a good drought tolerant, low water using plant. Turn it off.
And then another question about fruit trees, and you might want to pitch the Master Gardener line, but do you have any rules of thumbs of how often to water fruit trees?
When they need it? No. I'm gonna send you guys to the experts on some of these things. You can contact the Master Gardeners, and I do believe they have an actual website. Look up Santa Barbara Master Gardeners and it'll take you directly. They have specialists in native plants, they have specialists in fruit trees. Personally, I only have a couple of fruit trees. I haven't killed them yet, but they're also like 30 years old, so it's going to be hard to kill them. And I'm reading the Master Gardener's book right now because I just planted a bare root new fruit tree. So I'm learning as well as you guys. I do know they like organic. I do know they don't like to have other plants above the feeder roots, which is underneath the canopy of the tree. You have the rain drip line of the canopy of the fruit tree. It's best that you don't plant grass, you don't plant flowers, you don't plant weeds there. You just keep it as mulch, keep it cool, it'll break down. You'll have worms that'll live in there, it'll add nutrients to the soil and heat for nutrients from grass and vinca and flowers and whatever else anybody else plants. Especially citrus trees, really shallow feeder roots.
And then related to that, so better to hand water them and give them a good soaking once per month, or to do it every 2 to 3 weeks is it better to hand water them and soak them instead of drip irrigation, essentially like the emitters, not a soaker hose?
I think either way works fine, as long as you're meeting the needs of the plant. I don't have the time because a lot of fruit trees need hundreds of gallons of water. And I more than once have left the hose on soaking, moved it. I left it on overnight and I had a bill that was 20 HCFs higher than normal. So I go with a timer on my drip irrigation. But if for you, the tree is smaller and you have a well and you can fill that water well up, let it sit, come back in a few hours and see how moist the soil is. that might work best for you. It's really very individual.
And then for the soil types, what is the most common soil type in Santa Barbara? I don't think it is loam. That's what we all want to have, right? Is perfect loam.
No, it's not the most common. If you live, it depends on where you live. And honestly, you can have different soil types on your side yard and your front yard. I live in Goleta. I think they used to make adobe houses with the soil that we have out here. It's very clay unless you have amended it and added organic matter. And over time, you can create a lovely, wonderful clay loam soil that holds moisture, that's full of nutrients that plants do really well in. If you live out on the mesa, you may be one of those folks that has shale underneath and sand. You'll know who you are because it's really difficult to get things to grow. If you have a very sandy soil, the answer once again, mulch, compost, organic matter, and when all else fails, put hardware cloth and build a raised bed. Keep the gophers out and give yourself a growing medium that you can go. It takes a little bit of time, but for most of Santa Barbara and Goleta, we have a pretty solid soil. We have a lot of clay in our soil. And if you don't, maybe you live up in the Riviera, there's a really open rocky substrate. So you might have clay on the surface. And as soon as you overwater and you find a gopher hole, you'll never see overwatering. It'll go down that gopher hole, through the rocks, into the creek, and show up 2 miles down the way, unfortunately.
For drip stations, did you say that 20 minutes is the minimum for a drip station to run?
For mature plants, if you have mature water-wise plants, yeah, 20 minutes, you're not even going to get, most people will have a 1 gallon emitter on one side of the plant, a 1 gallon emitter on the other side of the plant, which is less than a gallon of water. And if you're not watering but once every or twice a week, probably not appropriate for a mature plant that maybe has 12 to 18-inch roots. If it's a newer landscape and you're getting it established, certainly, 20 minutes might be more than enough with both of those. If it's only a year old, less than 2 years old, you really do, you have to get your hands dirty and see where the moisture is.
Digital technology, right, Kathy?
I like that. And not just on the surface, get down a couple inches.
All right, well, I think those are all of our questions. We had a lot of great questions that came in at the end. So thank you everyone who was able to stay as long as we did. And as a reminder, I will send out the recording of the webinar to everyone, most likely tomorrow. And some of the links that I put in the chat, I will include as well. All right, thank you so much, Kathy. Thanks,
You're
everyone.
welcome. Don't forget to make a copy of the irrigation schedule sheet so you can write down what your current schedule is so you have something to start from. Looking forward to it. I'm glad you guys are here for spring and ready to go.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.